So let's take a legal deep dive into President Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. Defense attorney Hector Diaz of Diaz Law joins me now. All right, Hector, explain first of all what this temporary restraining order does from what this federal judge did.
It simply blocks the enforcement of the executive order. So let's pretend that this wasn't litigated in the district court there in Washington, D.C., or in the state of Washington, then ultimately it would go into effect. They would try to enforce it. That's a whole nother issue in terms of how you enforce and determine birthright citizenship, and that's a whole nother issue. But this restraining order basically says we're going to pause it. This is, there's a preliminary determination that this is blatantly unconstitutional.
Right, against the 14th Amendment.
Right, but they're going to allow the parties to brief the issue further. They're likely going to have a hearing, and then the court will make a determination at that point whether to continue not just with the temporary restraining order, but in fact to find that this executive order is unconstitutional.
So, I mean, the fact that, and Arizona is involved in this as well. You've got attorneys general from 22 states, including us. What do you think will happen? I mean, with these executive orders, obviously, all these lawsuits happening, I mean, what kind of a ripple effect will that have?
I think it's important, looking at the order that was issued by the federal court. The court made the statement, which I think there's some truth to this, which is, did any lawyer review this before it got issued, before this executive order got issued? Because there's precedent, there is constitutional precedent that if you're born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. And so, there was a little bit of discussion in terms of the phrase that, Trump and Trump's administrations are grabbing onto, but there is just a mountain of precedent that counters that notion. So I think it will play itself out. It will be briefed. I think you're going to see President Trump and the administration kind of really go on a PR effort to explain this. But in the end, I'm not going to be surprised if this is found unconstitutional and this is just another, they'll let it go by the wayside.
Okay. I want to get to another action that is affecting 170 million Americans, TikTok users. President Trump signed an executive order seeking to delay the ban by 75 days that was supposed to be shut down last Sunday. Hector, I remember last week, you were saying, I don't believe it's going to go dark. And really, it didn't. So here comes another deadline. Now what?
I think even prior to that pronouncement, the TikTok officials and some of Trump's administration, even though they hadn't officially gone into office, were talking about how this was going to work out.
Right.
And quickly, President Trump's team pushed out that they could see a viable kind of joint partnership, 50-50 partnership with some U.S. company. And that's what's being hammered out here. That has to be what's hammered out. There's too much money on the table for ByteDance to just simply look the other way and say, you know what, we're done. We're going to pull out. Thank you so much. They realize that TikTok's important to the U.S. consumer, and there's a lot of money to be made.
Yeah, and a lot of people would be really upset. Speaking of a buyer, there's been a string of names being rumored to buy TikTok. We're talking Elon Musk, even Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. You've got Mr. Beast. He just got his name in the fray. Now, Trump has said, as you said, the U.S. government should own half of TikTok's U.S. business in return for keeping the app alive, or else he said that he could impose tariffs on China if there's no deal. Do you think that would happen? That, that possibly somebody here will buy it?
I think it's more likely that you have a U.S.-based company.
Okay. Not a sole owner.
Distinction being the U.S. government, right? I know there's been some conversation about whether the U.S. government could come in as an owner. I think there are all sorts of issues and constitutional issues and things that would just prevent that. But I do think we're going to see probably a strong U.S. buyer here in the next week or so.
In the next week?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we'll talk about it next week. Okay, so let's get to our last case. In an attempt to crack down on immigration, President Trump authorized ICE to target courthouses, schools, and churches. It revokes a directive that was enacted back in 2011, which prohibited ICE and Customs and Border Patrol officers from arresting suspected undocumented immigrants in a variety of locations. What kind of effect do you think this will have?
Yeah, it's going to have a ripple effect in terms of, maybe kids not going to school, parents not wanting to take their children to schools.
There's already that fear. Yeah.
Right. And, to the extent that these hospitals and churches have served as sanctuaries, maybe people aren't going to go to the hospital if, they have some concern that ICE might be there waiting for them. And so, it's a question of whether or not, we are hearing some information that it's being enforced already, that there's some concern that ICE is showing up. There's also concern whether or not some of these businesses or churches or city governments are actually going to cooperate. Will they let ICE into the door? That's a whole nother issue in terms of it. And I know President Trump and then his administration has said, if anybody interferes with us, we're going to arrest public officials on this. So it is, every day we're going to be hearing about something new, something, progressive, something different coming out of that administration. It's going to be must-see TV in terms of, something, what we see here.
Well, and in fact, the fact that he's broadening this, strict kind of sweeping of illegal immigrants.
Right.
I mean, that just, I would think, puts more of a strain on resources too. But on the flip side, I'm wondering, what about the rights of, these immigrants? Do they have any?
Yes and no. I'm giving you the lawyerly response. Yes
Right.
and no. To the extent that they're contacted by an ICE official, they have the right to remain silent. They don't have to, discuss where they're from. There's certain, to the extent that they're arrested, they would then be given certain immigration rights in terms of maybe requesting an immigration hearing. So there are rights in that regard. Are they the full, rights that a U.S. citizen is given? No.
Right.
But there are rights, and we're going to hear more about this because I think this is something that I think the Trump administration is going to dig in on.
Yeah, and it could have a big effect right here in Arizona, obviously.
Absolutely.
All right, Hector, thank you so much for your deep dive. We appreciate it. Troy?